All right, thank you all for coming back and coming to order. We're going to continue our discussion now of issues facing the Asian Pacific Islander Desi American or Apida community. The term Apita is a pan-ethnic classification that intentionally calls attention to Pacific Islanders and South Asians, also known as Desi, who are part of the larger Asian American community. As our keynote speaker, Dr. Jung, attested, the last 2 years have been especially difficult for members of the Peta community as they have been forced to grapple with a surge in anti-Asian hate during COVID-19 pandemic. This session brings together a panel of Appetita-identifying faculty, staff, and students of varied backgrounds and experiences. In addition to telling their stories, the panelists will discuss the need for building stronger community ties among Appeta-identifying and other BIPOC colleagues and address how the university community can create a more inclusive and welcoming environment for all. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Natalie Chin, who will introduce both the panelists and the panel.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in person and virtually for our panel today, the Epita community in Wisconsin, our lived experiences on campus and beyond. Thank you to DDEEA for giving my co-organizers and I the opportunity to bring this session to the Diversity Forum this year. My name is Natalie Chin. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a Uw-Madison staff member, more specifically, the Climate and Tourism Outreach Specialist with Wisconsin Sea Grant and the Aquatic Sciences Center, a position that brought me to Wisconsin and Uw-Madison about 2 years ago from Purdue University, though I was born and have spent most of my life on the East Coast. I'm of Chinese, Japanese, and French-Canadian descent, but identify more as Asian American and not really any particular ethnicity. For our session today, we'll be hearing from a panel of individuals from across campus whose identities are considered to fall under the Apida umbrella. The idea for this panel evolved out of some collective brainstorming by a few of us in DDEEA's Apida Affinity Group, along with others who have been kind enough to offer their feedback along the way. As Dr. Charleston noted, Apida is a relatively new term that's used to describe people who trace their origins to Asia, the Pacific Islands, and South Asia. The map that we're sharing highlights the countries that are geographically considered Asia and the Pacific Islands. However, the borders around the term Apida are not as clearly defined as what appears in this map. You may be more familiar with the term Asian American, which was first used in the 1960s by student activists at UC Berkeley, who, inspired by the Black Power movement, sought to create a new collective Asian identity that could command greater political power. Pacific Islander was added in the 1980s to create another, probably also familiar term, AAPI. This expanded categorization is meant to include people of nationalities and ethnicities that originate from islands in the Pacific, including Hawaii, Guam, and Samoa. More recently, in the last decade or so, the term Desi has been added, which brings us to the term Apida. In this context, the addition of Desi is meant to intentionally include people who identify as South Asian, such as folks with origins in modern-day India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal. Overall, the unwieldy Apida acronym is an imperfect attempt to encompass the vast diversity of nationalities and ethnicities that originate from the continent of Asia and the Pacific Islands. And the evolution of this term has not been without consequence, especially for folks whose identities are still absent from and whose experiences have been erased by this grouping. The goal of this session is not to define who is Apida or not. Our hope is that you will come away from our session today with a better sense for the diversity of the Apida community and the start of a conversation that will hopefully continue at future diversity forums. While we strive for diversity in our panelists, we haven't been able to and couldn't capture it all in one panel. However, we have tried very hard to include folks in our panel whose voices you may not have heard before. I'm very grateful to all of our panelists for sharing their voices with us today, especially given the surge in anti-Asian sentiment and violence during the COVID-19 pandemic against the backdrop of a long history of anti-Asian discrimination, as we heard about from Dr. Zhang. I'm going to turn things over to my co-moderator, Rebecca, in just a second. She's going to be walking us through some prepared questions that we've asked our panelists to answer, but we've also saved some time at the end for audience questions. For everyone who's joining us virtually, please submit your questions on the event platform in the chat. And I don't know how active the chat will be, but if you post your question with a question mark symbol or a Q at the beginning, it will help me find it later. And then for everyone here in person, there are note cards again on your table, and you can write any questions that you have on those tables, on the note cards, and we'll have them brought to the stage later by our runners. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca and our panelists.
Thank you, Natalie. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here with us today, and thank you especially to each of our panelists for your contributions. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I use she, her pronouns. I am a study abroad advisor and international programs manager with the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences here at Uw-Madison, where I've worked for the last 2 years. I was born in Virginia, but shortly after my birth, my family moved abroad, and we only returned when I was in middle school. I am of Korean and Western European descent, with my mother's family immigrating to the U.S. from South Korea in 1973, and my father's ancestors from Norway, England, Sweden, Ireland, Scotland, and France over the course of several hundred years. I do not feel that I comfortably fit into any one of these identities, but I do identify as Asian American. And with that, I'm very honored to be moderating today's panel, and I would like to begin this panel with some introductions from each of our panelists. So if our panelists wouldn't mind beginning on my far right, and then we will move down to the left. If you would share your names, your pronouns if you feel comfortable doing so, your position on campus, and how you would describe your race or ethnicity in your own words.
Hello. 자식들의 생지 상황을 잠들여 의미가 이시자수 네 나쁘가 상마지 본이지 아니 본원이 아니 강의 만부지다 아니 시용의 강의 반조의 강의 아니야 디나신기 아니 찹스의 강의 진짜 강의 만부지 공기 아니 그래서 야가라파 자주용 바리 야가니 야 아르레니다 파츠lun시 장이로 침바레 아니 단당이 레카 지사디 아니 FBM 지 아니 단다 세긴시 리름니바디 리팅이야디 나라치기야레
Hello. My name is Yang. I'm here to interpret for Yeshi. And Dutch Delay to everyone. Dutch Delay is Tibetan Greeting. It means welcome and have a good health. I was born in Tibet because Tibetan people have been facing serious social and educational, economic and racial and political difficulties in Tibet in the last few decades. I had to flee to India and seek refuge. My parents are Tibetan, and so I claim myself as a Tibetan and Asian American. I'm currently working as a second shift custodian at FPM. This is my 10th year working on campus, and I'm happy where I am now and enjoy my job. This is for Yishi. And myself, I'm Yang Bongyel, and I'll provide translation and interpretation services in Tibetan language at the Cultural Linguistic Service, Office of Human Resource. And I grew up in Tibet, and then later went to India and spent 15 years in Nepal in India before coming to the US. And then I taught at Indiana University, Bloomington, Tibetan language, culture, and I was a Hoosier. And now I'm a bona fide Badger. And so I enjoy Wisconsin. And I'm also Tibetan, and I consider myself an Asian American. Thank you.
My name is Anjali Sridharan. My pronouns are she and her. And I am currently in the Office of Sustainability, and my position is Business Process Improvement Manager there. and I've been on campus almost 17 years. I would describe my race as Desi American, and when those two letters were added to the Appeta acronym, I was in seventh heaven. I felt, okay, we've arrived. And I think that's about it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tev Lee. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the program coordinator under the Multicultural Student Center. I oversee the Apida Student Center located in the iconic red gym in the North Mezzanine space. And I identify ethnically as Hmong and Chinese, but I go by Hmong American. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today.
Hello, my name is Kevin Wong. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am one of the research coordinators at the University of Wisconsin Survey Center overseeing our field staff doing in-person interviews, which isn't happening as much recently as you might imagine. That said, my parents are both from Taiwan and I identify as Asian American. Ethnically speaking, I am definitely more of Chinese ethnicity, but folks are from Taiwan, not mainland China. And I was personally born in the United States, so Asian American is very much identity that resonates with me.
Hi, I'm Lori Quito Lopez. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a professor in communication arts, and I'm the director of the Asian American Studies program. I identify as mixed race, specifically fourth generation Japanese American and white.
Hello everyone, my name is Assel and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a Ph.D. candidate in Slavic languages and literatures. I'm a dissertator and I'm from Kazakhstan. I'm Kazakh and I identify as Central Asian.
Thank you, panelists. And now we'll move into our first question. What brought you to Uw-Madison in Wisconsin, and how has your identity impacted your experience here? And let's switch it up and begin on the left.
Well, as I said, I'm doing PhD here in Russian literature. And before coming here, before starting the program at UW, I lived all my life in Kazakhstan, and I'm ethnically Kazakh. So, which is, well, I was one of majority in my own country. But I guess when part of our identity, of Kazakhstani identity, is that we are hybrid, like in a way we are in between culturally. Because if you take me as an example, I am Kazakh ethnically, but my first language, my native language is Russian. And many people there have this inner conflict of identity. Who are we? Like, we speak Russian, but we ethnically Kazakh. And this comes from our colonial past. So I felt this conflict more acutely here when I came here, when I understood, when I realized that, okay, so Russian is my first language, but I'm not Russian, I don't look Russian, and okay, but no one knows that Central Asian, who is Central Asian here, so I was more perceived as Asian here, and I guess what was interesting for me is that it was a bit different in the sense that Asian here is more understood as something else. Central Asia is not quite understood as Asian. And yeah, I guess that's what I experienced.
So my research is on Asian American media. I wrote a dissertation on Asian American media. So what brought me here was that there was a job posting in the communication arts department for a professor of media and identity. So when I got this job, I was brought in specifically to teach about race in media and gender and sexuality. So I would say that being a person of color who studies race and racism has significantly shaped my experience here. I was really excited to come from California, where there are many Asian Americans doing Asian American studies, to a place to a predominantly white institution where I felt like my work could make more of a difference. I was really excited to be in a place where there weren't a lot of people like me. I've been the only Asian American woman in my department. For a long time, I was the only woman of color in my department. I think I'm the first woman of color to be promoted to full professor in my department. So I think that being a person of color has been really important, and that I'm trying to, I've like become comfortable with being the person who is bringing discussions of race into as many conversations as possible, and that's the work that I'm intending to do here.
So I've actually spent most of my life in Wisconsin. I started living here around first grade, second grade or so. Grew up here, and then when it was time to go to college, I was like, you know, I'll stick around. So I came back to, stayed in Madison, and went to UW-Madison and got my undergrad there. Did a few years working in the private sector, and then there was a job opportunity to come back, and I loved it so much that I decided to come back here. One of the things about how my identity has impacted that is that I've met a lot of great people who have similar identities to myself, but I do not necessarily share that experience because I've grown up in a predominantly white part of this world, which is Wisconsin. And coming on campus, we have certainly a lot of areas where we are trying to increase that diversity, but for example, in my work itself, I'm also still one of the few persons of color. And that has actually driven me to try and, I think Dr. Young did a great job saying flock, flock to other folks. So that's how I got involved with these great people here. And also that's what prompted me to work with our alumni association with the Apida Affinity group, because I'm trying to find other folks that look like me and have similar experiences as myself, but also at the same time realizing that there is a wide breadth of experience there, and that they are not, it is not a monolith. And I think that is really where I'm at right now. I'm happy to be here with all these folks.
All right, Tevli. So I'm originally from Wisconsin. I grew up here, I went to school here, started off at a 2-year campus and then transferred to a 4-year campus, so much love to transfer students. And then received my master's in student affairs in administration and higher education. And after that, I moved down to Chicago, Illinois, was there for 3 years before I decided to come back and move back to Wisconsin. And so just a fun fact, Wisconsin is known to be the 3rd state with the largest residing Hmong population, the first being California, followed by Minnesota. I'm a first-generation college graduate of refugee parents and also a TRIO alum. So hashtag TRIO work. I first started here at UW-Madison with the Center for Educational Opportunity, or CO, as an advisor. And as I made a transition in my professional career and trajectory into this position, I took a leap of faith and jumped into this opportunity to continue passionately working with students to foster a holistic approach to their academic career and journey here in higher education. And so I would say that there are a multitude of ways in which my identity as a Hmong American continues to impact my experiences here. The first is being that the Hmong community's footprint here in the state is huge. And so understanding and being cognizant of the fact that I identify physically as the majority of Asian Americans, and how media and mainstream tends to focus and think of Asian Americans I utilize that in my work to strive to uplift voices that go unheard within the Epita community, such as our Desi and South Asian and Pacific Islander voices. And so I want to continue doing this work to foster a more holistic approach and to illustrate a bigger picture of the unique colors of the Epita community here on campus. So.
Not easy to go after that, Tev. Come on. All right, so what brought me to UW-Madison? Well, my parents independently came to UW-Madison to Madison in the 60s and met on campus, and they never expected to stay neither here nor in this country. And now they've been married for 53 years and have been in Madison for longer than that. So I was born here, and my parents really wanted me to go to college here, so I went to college here, and I didn't want to do anything Indian because my parents are from India, and I became the president of the India Students Association. And then I ran away to Chicago and then to Europe, and then I came back, and there was I worked in the private sector. And and I never wanted to get a Ph.D. because that's what both my parents did, so I would not want to be like them, right? And no, I didn't. So, and then I came back when there was a new office created about 17 years ago called the Office of Corporate Relations. It reported to the Chancellor's office, and it bridged the gap, connected the university as a resource to executives in companies across the state and the country. And I thought this was perfect, right? By that time, I had 2 degrees from here in engineering and in business, and then I had worked in the private sector. So I understood the university and I understood the private sector. So I connected for 7 years resources, faculty members, research, and all other resources on campus to C-level executives in companies. And I absolutely love that. And later, I've moved to project management here on campus. So it's been a wonderful experience, and 17 years is a long time, right? So.
아니 nga 준비나 단다다 야갈 자주라 용니 로 같이 되버리 다티니 야갈 기능라 강이 많다고 지태기 하는 거라 아니 디니 츠아질라레 아질라레니 루인시 자정 신바레 다nga 준비나 보나라 강이 망부치 자작해니 저 강이 망부치 되기 하래 아니 베나시나다 지금 알아 되고 딘데니 tsiare 디니 저 델헤니 위스콘신라 헤니 아니 다 아질라 헤니 가 위스콘신라 용바이 위스콘신 나라 아니 가르치나 쇼치니 아주 보가 뭐야래 쇼치니 단다 달라마 데 체치식스 페어로 딘데기 지 수수 달라마 체 망보 배상 가 수수에 나가도 쇼치니 단다 데라 想卡个里个因上吧，安尼叔叔那他想来个经验的上吧，今天个去高西到有点上，威斯康星点当用吧的，那第几了当的 UW 个拿来那个钱的，刚现在点拿了，挺健忙不起，那叔叔了去当这个上，安尼当的给的说话，你别强养给你别去当桥呀的，点拿心个，安尼就叔叔지강에 가기 요가 지간 걸로 아니 그럼 요 잠바니 뜻은 디나라 아니 차진 간걸로 청대우 잠바 뜻은 랍단디 된지 대바리 데비랑 테텔라 수수기 한지 아디 강치텔라니 시작 니 시도인지니 갈리제고요 딘삼바 아니 수순델라니 지 유다블나라 레카치비랑 테텔라 할리비치가 세우다 수수 도바 강지니 다 수수 강에 망부지지는 어서
After living in India for many years as a refugee and having experienced some hardship, I moved to USA and have been living in Madison, Wisconsin for the last 22 years. In my hometown in Tibet, people have been living with the fear and the terror due to the lack of freedom and human rights. But here in this country, I have freedom, and I'm happy now. And so I grew up in that kind of environment back in Tibet. Wisconsin has a large Tibetan population than my home village, and also has a monastery. And there's also a Wisconsin Tibetan Association Community Center, and I'm also actively involved community activities. And I decided to come, His Holiness Dalai Lama has visited Madison 11 times. I decided to come to Wisconsin because, like many of my friends residing in Madison, and I grew up in a farm area in Tibet, and Wisconsin is also a farming state, so I like this state. And UW-Madison offers employment opportunities, language assistance to their employees, regardless nationality and race and gender and language differences. So I was lucky to get my current job, and I started my job on campus in 2011, and have been doing my job with my best energy, sincerity, and loyalty. So this work ethic makes me mentally happy and physically strong. So I believe this is my life and occupation.
Thank you, panelists. Our next question is, what does the term Epita mean to you, and do you identify with it? Why or why not? And let's begin at this end again. Assel.
Wow. So when Natalie and Rebecca invited me to participate in the panel, I was not sure what Appetita meant to me, and for now I cannot give you a definite answer because, I guess the closest will be the first A, Asian, but according to the US Census, Central Asians are white, and that's every time I have to file a form in the hospital or anywhere, and they ask me to put the check, what is your race, and I always feel conflicted. On the one hand, according to census, I am white, but, well, I'm Central Asian, so I am Asian, so I should put the check next to Asian. So I put other because I cannot, I don't know what would be the right answer here. Yes, that's another thing probably we should consider and discuss in the future. Where are Central Asians in this discussion? That took a short answer.
Yes, I also grew up checking other on those boxes. So I identify as Asian American. I would say that when I was in college, I did have an enormous identity crisis because as a mixed race person, I realize I'm ethnically ambiguous looking, and I know that race is a lot about how people see you in the world and how people understand your race. So for a while, especially when I was studying abroad in Japan and no one recognized me as Japanese, I thought I should not claim the term Asian American because I might benefit from white privilege or passing privilege. But then I also, Asian American identity is also political, and as I became more involved with Asian American activism, I became more comfortable embracing that term. Now as I said, my whole career and life's work is about Asian American communities and experiences and identities, so now I feel very comfortable with that term, but it's been kind of a journey. For the term Apida, this is, as we learned about, this is a newer term. I was taught this term from the student activists on campus who I supported in their struggle to have the Appeta Student Center created. So they taught me about the use of that term, and I think it's great. Since the history of the term Asian American itself is about self-determination and about the fact that we should ask people of color how they want to be identified and think about what it means to them, I think that language is changing all the time and that we should listen to those who are most impacted by those changes and be open to whatever it is that people want to be called. So I like the term Apida. I happen to use the term Asian American for myself, but I'm okay with all these different configurations. I think that they are all fighting for more inclusion.
So I think I've dealt with the question of where are you from a lot in my life. And that's always been difficult for me because, like, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Madison. Oh, no, before that, before you came to Madison. Oh, yeah, Switzerland. No, what, like, where were you born? Oh, no, I got you, St. Louis. Like, that's not what the answer they're looking for. What I've found is, like, it's a more nuanced question that I have to have a conversation with someone about. And sometimes when it gets down to it, it's like, oh, my parents are from Taiwan. And then there's that, it gets political. So everything is very complicated. And what do I identify as is a very interesting question for me personally. So when I look at the term of Apida and what it means to me, I think it is very much an attempt to be as inclusive as possible in describing folks who hail from that region or who have roots or can trace their ancestry back to that region. Do I identify with it? Yes, I definitely do because that is true of me. But at the same time, I think that just like when I have other conversations about where am I from, it is still a conversation to be had. It's not simply just a label that can be slapped onto someone, but more of a conversation where we have stories to tell about where we're from, what we identify with, who we also identify with.
Thank you, Kevin.
Hello, Tavli again. I think Peta to me means an opportunity to engage and cultivate in an ever-growing community. I didn't identify with it at first, but of course being the inaugural program coordinator for the Appetita Student Center, I had to, right? It would be preposterous if I didn't, right? But I quickly found myself searching for meaning in this term and what it meant for the folks around me, for the folks who utilize this term. And what I discovered through my work, especially with students, is that it's more than just a term, but it's a collective, right? It's a collective of shared experiences that make up the term Appeta. And these experiences are of hurt and harm, but also strength and resilience. And so it's my hope that I continue to resonate with this term so that way it can continue to encompass and become a bridge that extends to a variety of other lived experiences of Asian Americans.
So I had never heard the term Appeta before. And I also struggle with this other box, right? So when I first saw the term Appeta, I looked it up. Actually, I saw the kickoff of your student center, and then I looked it up, and I'm like, what? They've added 2 letters to this? 2 letters that mean something to me? I was in shock because I still remember the first Verizon commercial when there was an Indian American, a Desi American on the commercial, and I wanted to shout somebody and go, somebody that looks like me is on a commercial. So Appeta was a really exciting term for me, or abbreviation, acronym for me, because it adds the 2 letters that separates out my cultural background, my ethnicity, so that I feel like I belong. I feel bad that it also includes a lot of other ethnicities that probably are not called out as blatantly, because Desi is a term that Indian people call themselves. So, you know, there's the Pakistani, the Bangladeshi, all the others that are not called out like that. So what does it mean to me? And now that I know what it means, because it's new, I do identify with it. And because it specifically calls out my ethnic background, and I never felt included before as I do now.
Ngi tanda APIDA si tani de ko tambure tina singi tanda da ngarang chumbaina boba chire boba America chire tina singi Asia gi ene America chi imchami ko APIDA seati da yimba chire was ane tin samba ngarang sinang la kari ting sinanda tanda nga boba chi imchani boba gi tanda Asia imchani ngarangi bim tani dila samu matang yukuni sani jila samu tangi mes ane chi sonang la ko leka kari nanda susu ki lengin di yapu jida ane chi kang tutuki chi chi taga jungna nanti ngarangi pet karasikurda lengin chi sanka yosi.
For me, Epita is a new and I've heard the first time, and also heard its history at the first time today. And I'm a Tibetan American, and so I believe everyone in this hall is same, and one is we can talk about one is, and regardless of our color, the race, language, and nationality. So we all are part and parcel of one human being. And so since this Appetita is new to me, I'm still learning about this, and so there are many things to learn.
Thank you, panelists. As you can see, we have a variety of point of views even within our panel, which is part of the point. So for this next portion, I hope it's a little bit more conversational. So far, we've had every panelist address these questions. And at this point, we're going to pose some questions where a couple panelists are going to start us off. But then at that point, it's really going to be more of an open discussion amongst our panelists. So if someone feels moved to speak, they will. All right, and our next question is, what do you see as the advantages or disadvantages of using the term Epita to describe a diverse collection of Asian identities? And Tev is going to start us off.
Thank you. So earlier, we started off this panel with the definition of Appeta, and I just wanted to reiterate again the definition and kind of provide a little bit more of a historical context to the term. And so the term Appeta stands for Asian Pacific Islander Desi American, and this term was coined around 2010, 2011, or the early 21st century. And it derived from the term AAPI or APIA, which stands for Asian American Pacific Islander or Asian Pacific Islander American. And as opposed to saying Asian American, which refers to a US citizen or resident of Asian descent, the implication that this term, particularly taking a look at Asian American, has had over the course of history and societal norms is that it illustrates and depicts a picture and a bias that Asian Americans are Central or East Asian, which is not entirely true. And so although there are times in which the terms are used interchangeably, it depends solely on the individual and context. And so hence the term Appeta emerged to capture a more diverse and accurate depiction of Asian Americans as a way to be more inclusive of South Asians as well as Pacific Islander. However, I do want to point out that Desi is often used as a term for a person who is of South Asian descent or traces their heritage to one or more South Asian countries, but not everyone who is South Asian identifies as Desi. And so, it's important for us to continue to point out while we utilize this term Appeta, we should also acknowledge that it's an imperfect term that is mostly encompassing the majority of Asian ethnic groups. So we need to also be intentional in its limitations and to remember to include those who are of the minority or indigenous groups of Asian ethnic origins and countries.
Thank you, Tev. Now, Assel?
Actually, I think I would just repeat what Tev said, but I think the term Appeta is good in a way that, it was, as it was mentioned before in our keynote lecture about flocking, that it helps us to work against some issues together. But also, as an international student here on this panel, I think it's important to include international students here, like in this term as well, not only Asian Americans or.
Thank you. Would any other panelists like to respond? If not, we'll move on to the next question, which is.
Rebecca, sorry,
Oh,
a quick
great.
comment. Yeah.
Get in there, Kevin.
I think there's a duality there of simultaneously, if we're being intentional with the term and deliberate, like Tev mentioned, and using that to capture the breadth of experiences, I think that's a huge advantage to being able to not center. So because the stereotypical Asian, for example, is East Asian, we don't want to have that be the only centered thing that comes to mind when using a term. So having a more broader term is definitely a good thing. But at the same time, we do have that problem where you can't lump everyone into the same group. The breadth of experience cannot be categorized under one roof, and we have to be careful about that. And just like Assel mentioned, for example, even with someone with like the same ethnic background, their experiences on campus, for instance, may be very different if they are and have grown or born in or have grown up in the United States or in Wisconsin, as opposed to someone who is new to this environment, for example, being an international student. So there is that duality there with whether or not this term is necessarily advantageous or disadvantageous.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. Our next question is, how has COVID and heightened violence against Asians over the last year and a half affected your sense of identity and connection to the broader Epita community? And we'll begin with Lori.
So as the director of our Asian American Studies program, I have definitely felt a sense of responsibility to our broader Appeta community during these times of heightened violence. There was certainly a sense of connection amongst the Appeta community on campus, and that there was so much fear. Even this affinity group came together more strongly in this time because there was a need to connect with each other, to talk about how awful it is that we all have to make those calls home to our elderly relatives, to tell them to stay safe on the streets. There was just so much sense of connection between us all. And as a program, we have also tried to strengthen our support systems. So, we're sending messages out to let people know that we're thinking about them and that we care for them. We've been holding processing spaces, leaning a lot, probably too much on Tev and the Epita Student Center to help us facilitate these kinds of conversations and spaces. But also, thinking back to what Dr. Jung was talking about with the importance of critical consciousness raising during this time, we have also taken it as a very strong responsibility of ours to provide educational resources in this moment. So this whole PowerPoint that he gave to you today is something that our Asian American Studies program has also been trying to share with broader publics. So we created this Atlanta syllabus, which is a public syllabus that has a list of curated readings. So if there's any of you who want to know more about the histories of Asian violence, about gender issues, about Asian Americans in the South, all the kinds of interconnected issues that caused us to arrive at this moment, the Asian American Studies program has a list of resources. And this is deeply connected to that idea that Asian American Studies is always for the people. It was never meant to stay within the walls of the university or just for students in the classroom, but it was something that was supposed to have a broader impact. And since we have this idea of the Wisconsin idea here, that our education is always supposed to extend beyond the boundaries of the university, I like to think that this moment, even though this moment of crisis for Asian Americans has been awful and traumatizing, there's also it's an impetus for us to do some more important work.
Thanks, Lori. And we'll move to Yishi.
Hello. 아니 나한테 디가라 삼슬라단다. 야나 후네니 채용비 다 네엠디레 니제디라 할리비니 베데 카르시고르다. 할리 항상 거예요. 아니 아주 첼리게비니 고쳐 친구지다. 잠만 수우당라니 다 마롱와다 만도비 아니 카르시고르다. 마센나 또 친구 중에 지레스. 아니 딘 잠바 아니 야나니 채용 삼바나 아니 뭐저 동시대 야민자비 동시 요체라 아니 동생 친구 주지 아니 디노싱기다 인제의 통총 아니 지금 가서 아니 동생 친구 주치니 데라 아니 가서 지기 여아들이나 아니 단다 디지군이 아니 가서 미망라 직제 동동아 아니 에시아미라 제 동동아의 딩데 동아든 원이 전에 답주주다 아니 다들 부분이 있으시는 인지치기요스.
The COVID-19 virus, which came from Wuhan in China, is unprecedented and very shocking. It brought to the world and the Wisconsin catastrophic miseries and loss of lives, and has been hard on everyone. So many people have turned hostile and discriminate and spew hate to those people who have the appearance of Chinese origin. I think engaging in violence and attacking Epita people is too extreme and narrow-minded.
내염 되기 전에 아니 지금 맞서 시동세는 직접다 신호지 외비간다 아니 제동동에 뜻을 간 걸로 다지 뒤천비 아니 지금 마가리나 지금 간 걸로 아니 직접이 썩지로 왔어 아니 대인상바 아니 그래서 제동동에 미디라 미르디다 아니 대기처럼 그래서 제동동에 잡아이나 그래서 이처럼 미디 그래서 미 저런 제동동사 미디가 참 잡아이나 아니 저런 거 나라 처음서 당한 좀도 삼비 저는 지기로 와서 이 마음이다 가서 다 디위게 자지로 와서 그러 이 잠바당 아주 아니 계속 저런 게 아니 딘데 인정 가대 저런 아니 셈다 아니 단나 갈수가 다 만들어 지금 거라서 그러 딘 잠바 저런 게 아니 지와디 간데 눈치인 바시그래라 맞춘 눈치도 가나 지짐도 가서 맞춘 거 동신 만들어지 마도 신 맞춘 디기 아메리카기 미치 바라스다 딘 삼방 아주 딘데라 아니 상무 지쪽에 상무지 당고야디 아니 계신 거래 샷스는데.
In addition to pandemic panic and horror, the racial discrimination and assaults are very threatening. And if a person who attacked someone of Asian origin and was then admitted to a hospital with COVID-19 and was given life-saving treatment by someone in the Appetita group, how and what he would think if the person who you attacked is the one who saved your life. At that moment, your mind eyes could be widely opened. Therefore, although we have different skin colors and are from various ethnicities, we are same people in same country. So it is very important that we treat and respect everyone as if they are a family member.
아니 단다 다 제동동안 딘데그니스 다 아주 롱춘진이 고고야로 통고야로 이 잠바도 통나베데 생주야로 주레샤스 간체 니춘데도 아니 좀 채와래 망와나 아주기 아니 도 중앙고 지역이지도 아니 아주 강가로 상동베도 계시고도 차리샤스.
I have seen heightened violence against Asians in the news, and it has disheartened me. Those incidents have already happened, but to stop and prevent them in the future, the government and the non-government organizations and the people of Epita, everyone here have the responsibility to educate and educate to the public and the university community.
Thank you so much. Would any other panelists like to respond? If not, we'll move to the next question. What do you want from the Appeta community, and how do we move forward together towards a shared future? We'll start with Anjali.
Probably more than, although I had planned on answering this about the Epita community and what I want from them towards a shared future. I am more interested in having a shared future with everyone and not just having the Epita community be supportive. I feel like one of the things that would be extremely helpful is we have a lot of different holidays, and various cultures have a lot of different holidays, and they don't make the radar on calendars. People are not aware of them. And for example, we just had, the Indian Americans had, or Desi Americans, had a 9-night festival. And it goes on through the work week and afterwards. And we celebrate. We go to different people's houses every night and wear different clothing and celebrate, but nobody knows about it. So they wonder why I look like I, had 1 hour of sleep for 9 nights straight. It would really be helpful if it was on a calendar so people would know. And for example, this Thursday is our biggest festival of the year. It's Diwali, the middle of a week. In India, they get a month off, right? A month. I'll say that again, a month. And my mom is like, okay, so since it falls on a Thursday, can you guys come over on Saturday for lunch? This is what, we wind up having to do because we're in a place where people don't know about it, and so we can't miss school. My kids can't miss school. My daughter's here. I won't let them miss school. And it's hard to celebrate things on a weeknight because there's homework and dinner and the work the next day. So I guess an awareness of the various cultures that are in our country and making sure that they hit the radar so people are aware and so people can celebrate with you, not just be aware, and understand. So for example, one of my colleagues in my office of 10 is Jewish. And so one of our staff meetings fell on a Jewish holiday, and the first thing the assistant director said is, I am so sorry we scheduled this meeting knowing that one of our colleagues can't make it. So if any of you cannot make it, we completely understand. It is an excused, that kind of understanding would make it so much more helpful so that there's an understanding among the whole, the individuals across the United States. So that, when people don't come to work when it's a holiday on the 24th and 25th of December, similarly, there would be that understanding for the rest of us.
Thanks so much, Anjali. All right, our next question is, how can the broader campus community recognize your contributions and support your community? And we'll start with Yishi.
Hello. Nigi legati litunmiwa to FM re ani dinala ni lega jingitsu ani timtambu niwa simbaji ni nyenseniga lega jigyore ani ngatsugi lirum dela ani 소중히 아니 맞출라 계기다 아니 가서보다 강해요 비기 아니 리브즈라 야조지야데 아니 김펜토던 레가살리도 사용다 김펜토던 스지다 춘토고 유지지야다 계지지야 틴진들도 강해 망부시 카드카드 아니 맞을 세트 지기야레스 아니 딘 삼바 맞을 리시기니 아니 컨텐츠 수수는 단디랑네니 아니 아무이디 랍타기 뭐 강요 같은 거 준비가 다시 지야다 디나신 마랑 준비는 아니 지 랍타는 게 레카디 수수기 컨텐츠기 컨쪽쪽기 아니 도와지기 요스티다 마랑기 베는이니 아니 소자기 진진 디데로 지지와 인상 맞을 때라니 야초 준시상 아틴데 지연스
I am a second shift custodian at FPM. There are first shift, second shift, and third shift employees in my job group. Working both days and nights shifters. Campus community recognizes and appreciates our work and supports us. So please continue doing this. The university offers language assistance in employment, workplace training, benefit information, campus policies with the translation and interpretation services for employees who have language barriers. These language services could be able directly to solve many workplace issues and difficulties. We, the CAS students, are considered as essential employees and have been shouldering our responsibility to the best of our ability in order to achieve the university and the divisional mission. And as for myself, my responsibility is to provide excellent service to get my job done and to make my co-workers happy and smile.
Thank you so much, Ishi. Tev.
So as I mentioned, I'm the inaugural program coordinator for the Epita Student Center. And so just a little brief history of the Epita Student Center. We opened our doors back in 2019. And the Epita Student Center is the result of student activism here on campus that started in 2017. And similarly, my position here, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for those student activists as well. And so my position emerged as a result of that. And so the programs in space located in the North Mezzanine space, I always make it a point to mention that they are startup spaces. It's not the end-all be-all for the Epita Student Center, nor is it the end-all be-all for the Latinx Cultural Center. Those spaces are startup spaces that were specifically fought for by student activists here on campus seeking a space to make themselves visible on this institution, which is a predominantly white institution. And so in my work, I continue to strive to make connections with various campus partners, such as partnering quite often with the Asian American Studies Department, who have wonderful faculty and staff. They are super mighty and just willing to support in any way that they can, so I'm super appreciative of that. And I also have strived to engage with many APIDA-identified groups and organizations on this campus as well to create a network of not only support but resources for students, because I understand that that for me, being Asian American, Hmong American, and being Appeta, representation matters, especially for students. And so for students to be able to see me in the spotlight like this, it brings them a lot of joy because, as Dr. Zhang mentioned earlier, is that they see themselves in me, they see themselves in us. So that's why it's important that the work that I do continues to impact this campus. And so it hasn't been easy. I think a huge part in being that COVID continues to impact my work and the work of my colleagues in the MSc and the respective identity centers. We're often at the front lines of conversations and engaging in dialogue and conversation around the ways that students of color are impacted here on this campus, especially taking note of the fact that our nation currently has a lot of racial tensions and social unrest and how that impacts our students. And so we often provide not only spaces for community building, but we engage in processing spaces and making sure that our students are taken care of, not just academically, but in terms of their mental health and wellness. And so in that, we are very grateful to partner with UHS MHS to be able to have a working relationship with them to have specific mental health providers for students of color. And each of our identity centers actually have a health ambassador tied with each of our identity center spaces to provide that mental health aspect to students. And so just as much as I am wanting and willing to engage and support students and support various campus partners, you know, I'm one person. Like, we're one office. We're one small group or collective up here. And so we would like to be supported in the same way. And so I just want to end with this in terms of my comments is that, you know, racial battle fatigue is real. And we experience this often in the work that we do. And so I just want to leave with this note is that DEI work is not just for a select group or offices, but it's the responsibility of an entire community who wants to seek and make changes. So.
Thank you so much, Tev.
Yeah, I would like to build on what Tev is saying there too. So one of the struggles on this campus is that when we look at the number of Epita students and faculty and people on campus, sometimes those statistics are removed from the bigger category of underrepresented minorities on campus. And we use the term targeted minorities, which is really important in looking at the disaggregated statistics of specific Epita identities that are definitely historically marginalized. But one of the things that I was hoping that you would learn from this panel today is that when you are a Peta on this campus, you feel like a minority. So it doesn't matter if the statistics show that we are well represented or that those numbers, like you have to remove Asian statistics in order to highlight the experience of other groups that are minoritized. We feel like minorities here, and that's the story that we're trying to share. So I guess something that I would like everyone to take back is to think about the Peta people in your units all across campus as being people of color who share that experience of being a minority on campus. I also hope that you have learned about the resources that we have to provide, that you've learned a lot about the Appeta Student Center, the Asian American Studies program. There's other things like our affinity group, the Apida alumni group. There's a lot of us on campus that are doing this work, and we want you to see us as resources. We want you to see us as people that you can turn to when you have questions about this so that our voices can be centered in all of these conversations. I wouldn't want you to think that people who are not Apita should walk away and just struggle on their own to answer these kinds of questions. Bring us into those conversations. But just as Tev said, if you think about turning to the Asian American Studies program and our 7 budgeted faculty, or the Appeta Student Center and the 1 person who runs it, and you think to yourself, that seems like a lot of work for them. I'm not sure they can handle, I don't know if they have the capacity to help me. Then join us in the fight for advocating for more resources, for more of us, and don't let those numbers stand as some sort of reason that we have enough Apeta people on this campus already. There needs to be more of us, so we can all keep doing this work.
Thank you so much, Lori, for encapsulating so much of what was said in this panel. All right, our final prepared question. So I hope our audience has been working on their own questions. You have note cards. You may be writing those and holding them up, and runners will begin collecting them soon. But I have one final prepared question, and I would love to hear from, we're going to start with Kevin, but I would love to hear from more panelists as well. So what gives you hope for the future? Short and sweet.
Is it too cliche to say the children are our future? But truth be told, I've had the opportunity to work with student affairs, Office of Inclusion Education, working with first-year students, freshmen, through for example, our Wisconsin program. And in there, having conversations with students, really seeing that things that I was not even exposed to in my high school experience, they already know about, they're already engaging with, they're already taking steps. And like we heard, the student center would not have been a thing without students pushing for that and demanding space for themselves in that regard. And for me personally, working with these young people and seeing that that is something that matters to them and that they're willing to take steps to accomplish is really hopeful. And I really hope that we as institutions from a higher level continue supporting that, continue giving them spaces, continue giving them funding, and doing what needs to be done to make those things a reality.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, I'll say something. The hope that I see for the future is the fact that this is the first time that I know of in the 17 years I've been on campus that I have felt that the Asian American, the Appeta group, is well represented in the diversity forum. I haven't seen that before. And so I feel like that gives me hope, that there's an inclusivity that I didn't feel before. And I also feel that that the reason that this whole thing happened was the DDEEA had some affinity group sessions, and 4 of us, actually 3 of us, attended, and we met virtually through that. And this idea came up in that one session because we were flocking. There was no other way that this would have happened. And one of them, Kevin, said, hey, one of my colleagues who couldn't make it today, her name is Natalie, she had this idea for a panel. If anybody's interested, contact Natalie. So afterwards, I wrote down the people's names, and I contacted them, and that's how this panel came to be. So these wonderful ideas of the affinity groups, the inclusivity of not just Epita, but all different ethnicities and cultures on campus and otherwise, that's the way we're going to make a future together as a society.
I guess I have several things to say to answer this question. What gives me hope for the future? Well, first of all, I guess it's my work, myself. I realized that when I was teaching Russian and a student asked me, like on my first class, like I said, how come you speak such a good Russian? And I was so surprised because I was like, okay, my name is not Russian, obviously. I don't look anything like it. And I didn't expect the question like this. And then I had to explain, okay, just because I look some way doesn't mean that, okay, I have to speak a certain language or whatever. And I got a little bit frustrated in the beginning. But then I realized, oh, I have a purpose. I can educate students about my culture, and I can teach something, and I can change, in a way, society. And so, I guess the first question would be answer would be me. I give myself hope for the future because I can change something. And second of all, people like on this panel give me hope. When I was invited to participate, I did not associate myself with Appeta, as I already answered. So, and I'm sure there are many people on this campus who are not sure with what thing they identify, where is their identity. And if we reach out to people like this, then maybe we can help them, and maybe we can make them feel safe, or they can help someone else who really needs help at this point. So thank you very much for inviting me. I really, really appreciate that. Yeah, I'm getting emotional a bit. Yeah. Thank you so much again.
I'm so grateful for this mask because I'm like crying a lot behind it. Well, thank you so much, panelists. I think we're going to go ahead and move into our question and answer portion. So Natalie has been dutifully gathering our virtual questions that have been submitted in the chat, and we are also gathering physical questions on note cards as well, so please feel free to hold those up for our runners if you have one. And I'm going to pass things back to Natalie now, so thank you so much.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, I'm a little emotional too now. So thank you everyone so much for sharing that. And I've been enjoying watching the chat during this. There's been a lot of great comments and feedback and support. So we'll have to look back at that later and share it with all of these folks, wonderful folks up here. So we have just about 5 minutes for questions. We'll get to as many as we can. And so we'll start with the first one, and it's, do you feel like the university is effectively taking the advice you're offering? Oh, sorry. It's, do you feel like the university is effectively taking the advice you're offering?
Well, my guess is that there wouldn't be an Appeta Student Center if they hadn't. So we're making starts, definitely. And the fact that this diversity forum, a colleague of mine texted me this morning and said, I couldn't get in. That's a great sign.
Okay, great. Next question is, are any of the panel members comfortable sharing possible struggles faced during the pandemic? And if so, how did you handle those struggles?
I can go. This is Ted. I think my experiences during the pandemic, it was a very unique situation. I started in this position the fall right before the pandemic, which would be, what is it, like 20, yeah, so like I started fall of 2019. And then of course, Apida Heritage Month is celebrated in the month of April here at Uw-Madison, but it's nationally recognized in the month of May. And so the way that I was impacted by the pandemic was that that spring, so like the week after spring break, we all went virtual. And so then I lost, like, you know, just if you can imagine, like trying to support students and like the student planning committee and making sure that they transitioned into virtual setting okay, and then here I was stuck with basically going back to square one with planning for Apida Heritage Month because all of our programs were planned for in-person. And so it was really the work of myself and my intern, Daniel Sanji, who was able to kind of start from square one and kind of reimagine and re-envision what Apida Heritage Month could potentially look like through social media, through virtual engagement. And so that's one way in which the pandemic definitely affected my work. And then personally, for me, the way that I was impacted was, I know Dr. Zhang had like talked about trauma, and I think for me, just hearing like what was happening around me, hearing from friends, hearing like from students and their experiences, there was one week where I remember I was like very in shock and like not wanting to go outside at all. Like I knew I had to go grocery shopping at one point. I laugh about that now, but like it was a really real experience for me in terms of like, you know, I'm recognizing that there is this trauma response happening. And so a way for me to kind of counteract that is to, you know, go with another friend to, you know, just basically pair up and like go out so that way I had somebody who could be with me if you know, anything were to happen or if I was, you know, targeted. So that's one personal way in which the pandemic has affected me.
Hello. nga sudong se na da tanda di 강의 망부지 체체래 강의 망부지 체체 잠바 sudong se na da 주부도 받아 디가도 받 간가로 집바직 정리가 집바직 성로와스 이 잠바는 수수그 짐성진이나야 수수그 짐성들라 니 집부주 용야디 수수기 도바데 스티나진기 미성 파쇼난다 미 파쇼난다 강가로 니 집부 용야 제득이 아니 강가로 파츠 허리퍼리지니 지기시라 펜토야기 딘데기 다시 지나 야고도스 아니 랑 수수가 배랑지는 니 현다딘데 지트나 야고도스 디나진기 맞저 겐데저스 스동 세나야 아니 지 상당히 많지 펜신 세우다 디제 도발마시 아니 강가로 상당히 진행이 봐서 로란 치고 디치바라 딘데기 어떤 진행인데 아니 요나니 미강가로 딘데기 강파로 지대지 강가로 지고야 아니 강가로 지 생각만 동안에서 정말 시대 아니 지금 니와로 지 뭐야 시대는 그저 어쨌든지 지야요 근데 지야는 근데 신의 야고도 왔어 이나지 야와로 무지기 또 시대는 신이 딘데기 지치기 알아 시대는 새디기 로지는 것을 지성화 딘데기 고요 잡이 지야요 알아요 말이었어 디치드나 야고도
The pandemic has been hard on everyone. Of course, no one wants pain and disease and suffering, and everyone wants happy and enjoy the life. And so, His Holiness Dalai Lama was teaching and cultivating love and compassion all over the world, and so he promote those areas, and so also he initiated a learning called SEE learning, SEE learning, and so started at Emory University, and so now this program has been implemented in many schools in different countries, and so during this tough time and difficult kind of situation, and if there's a program or classes on teaching love and compassion in our university or any other school, it would be helpful and can generate or cultivate more kind of love and compassion oriented society.
Thank you. Well, I think that I was hoping to end on a little bit of a more happier note, but I feel inspired by being in this room and sharing this space with all of you, and thank you so much for your time and attention today. I'd just like to end with another thank you to our panelists and Yangbum for being our interpreter. I know that's not an easy job, and our question runners and everyone else who has worked so hard to bring the Diversity Forum together. I'm looking forward to hopefully many more conversations about how we create a stronger campus community together. And again, if you have any further comments or questions, you can reach out to me via email at nchin5@wis.edu. We also did compile a list of resources that I'm not seeing on the virtual platform, but it did have links to things like the Asian American Studies program, the Asian American Student Center, the alumni group, the Atlanta syllabus, and so we'll try to figure out how to share that with everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. And thank you again. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the Diversity Forum.
Wow, such a powerful panel. I thank the entire panel for your contributions, for your leadership, for letting us into your lives, right, and for being vulnerable with us. You know, we're reminded that once you take a little bit of time to get to know folks, that you realize you have much more in common with them than there are differences. And so, you know, you don't have to be a part of to stand with, right? It's all of our responsibilities to eliminate our blind spots, and we have to be able to hold each other accountable for that. And so we are flocking with you all. So we're going to take a little bit of a break and get our lunches out. But before we do that, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the sponsorship of American Family Insurance, who have been rocking with us for the second year in a row, who have graciously helped to support this diversity forum, and their support and partnership really helps us to create an inclusive campus community and broader community and increase our collective impact. So thank you, American Family Insurance. So here's how we're gonna do this. We were thinking about releasing tables and all those sorts of things. There are box lunches out here outside of door 1. So if you all could just take the next 10 minutes or so to grab your box lunches and quickly move out of that area so other folks can come grab their lunches. You can bring that back in here. We're going to do an announcement of our Outstanding Women of Color in about 30 minutes or so, but you all can grab your food and come back in here and enjoy, and we'll start with our next event at 1 o'clock. So we have about an hour to eat and commune with one another, and again, we'll be making an announcement during that time. So thank you very much.